Imagine standing on a busy street, minding your own business, when suddenly, an officer kicks you to the ground for no reason. The crowd gasps, but here's the twist: the woman he assaulted wasn't just anyone. She was a billionaire. And standing in that crowd was someone who would change everything. This shocking story will leave you speechless, because the officer had no idea who was watching. "Get out of the way!" The command was sharp, cold, and laced with arrogance. Before anyone could even react, the officer's boot struck hard into her side, sending her sprawling across the pavement. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. People froze, their eyes wide, their breaths caught in their throats. She was a woman in her early 30s, tall and graceful, her outfit simple but elegant, a fitted blouse, black slacks, and heels that spoke of quiet confidence rather than flashy wealth. She clutched her stomach, wincing in pain, her phone skidding across the sidewalk. Nobody knew it yet, but this wasn't just some random woman. This was Alicia Grant, one of the most powerful real estate moguls in the country. A billionaire, respected in business circles, feared by competitors, and admired by thousands for her philanthropy. But in that moment, stripped of her title and identity, she wasn't the untouchable billionaire. She was just another black woman, humiliated in public by a man in uniform who thought the badge gave him the right to break her dignity. Officer Brad Simmons stood tall, his smirk dripping with satisfaction. His heavy boots crunched against the pavement as he leaned forward, glaring at her with eyes that carried both disdain and pride. He folded his arms across his chest as if daring anyone to interfere. "Learn to respect authority," he barked. The words cut deeper than the kick itself. To him, Alicia was nothing more than a target, an easy victim for his power trip. Around them, silence blanketed the street. No one dared move. No one dared speak. The only sound was Alicia's ragged breathing as she struggled to push herself up, her palms scraping against the rough ground. A few bystanders looked around nervously, some pulling out their phones but hesitating to record. They had seen what happened to people who challenged officers like Simmons. Fear held them back. Others whispered quietly among themselves. "Did he really just kick her?" one voice muttered. "She wasn't even resisting," another said, but their voices stayed low, swallowed by the heavy silence. Alicia, her face contorted in pain, forced herself to sit up. She blinked against the sting of humiliation, her dark eyes burning with quiet defiance. Her breathing steadied, but inside, fury roared like fire. This wasn't the first time she'd experienced racism, but the violence, the audacity of it happening here, in broad daylight, was something different. Something she couldn't let pass. But before she could even gather her strength to respond, movement stirred within the crowd. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate tailored suit, stepped forward. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement with deliberate weight, and the air seemed to shift as people recognized him. The silence deepened. Heads turned. Phones raised higher now, no longer hesitant. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't just another passerby blending into the background. This man carried authority of his own, not the kind pinned to a uniform, but the kind built from influence, power, and an empire of wealth. His presence commanded respect, even fear, from those who knew who he was. Alicia's blurred vision cleared enough to see him, and for the first time since the officer's kick, a flicker of relief crossed her face. She knew that voice, that silhouette. And Officer Brad Simmons? His smirk faltered. His confidence cracked ever so slightly. Because the man approaching wasn't just anyone. He was someone whose presence alone could change everything, someone whose words would weigh heavier than Simmons's badge, heavier than his threats, heavier than the kick he had just delivered. The crowd held its collective breath. Cameras were now rolling. Every second was being captured, every expression magnified. This moment was no longer hidden. Alicia struggled to her feet, leaning slightly but standing tall despite the pain. She brushed the dirt from her blouse with trembling hands, her eyes locked on the man who stepped forward to face Simmons. The officer straightened his stance, trying to mask his unease with arrogance. "This doesn't concern you," he growled, though his voice lacked the confidence from before. But it did concern him. Because this man wasn't going to stay silent. He wasn't going to let the abuse of power slide. And when he opened his mouth to speak, the world watching would realize, this wasn't the beginning of Alicia Grant's humiliation. This was the beginning of Officer Brad Simmons's downfall. Officer Brad Simmons was no rookie. He had been on the force for almost a decade, and in that time, he had built a reputation, not the kind of reputation a cop should be proud of, but one that people in the community knew all too well. They called him the bully cop. He was the kind of officer who wore his badge like a crown, strutting around as though it gave him the right to look down on others. If you were poor, if you were young, if you were black or Latino, Simmons saw you as less than human. And the worst part? He enjoyed it. For years, complaints had been filed against him. Mothers had marched into the station, furious over how he treated their sons. Small business owners spoke of harassment, of Simmons stopping by just to intimidate. But every time, the reports were lost, brushed aside by colleagues who didn't want trouble, or supervisors who quietly admired his tough guy approach. It gave him confidence, too much confidence. In his mind, he was untouchable. So when Simmons spotted Alicia that afternoon, standing outside a cafe waiting for her car, he didn't see a successful businesswoman. He didn't see a billionaire. He didn't see someone who was about to change his life forever. He saw what his prejudice wanted him to see, a black woman alone. A target. Someone he could assert his dominance over. "Hey! What are you doing here?" he demanded, approaching with his usual swagger. His hand hovered near his holster, not because she was a threat, but because it made him feel powerful. Alicia looked up from her phone, confused. "Excuse me?" "This area is private property," Simmons lied smoothly. "You can't loiter here." "Show me your ID." The cafe was public. The sidewalk was public. Everything about what he said was wrong, and he knew it. But Simmons didn't care. Rules didn't matter to him, only control. Alicia straightened, her calm, poised demeanor never slipping. "Officer, I'm not loitering. I'm waiting for my car. And unless I've done something wrong, I don't need to show you anything." Her voice was polite, steady, but firm. That was all it took to set him off. Years of unchecked arrogance boiled to the surface. How dare she talk back? How dare she not tremble at the sound of his voice? "You people never learn, do you?" Simmons muttered under his breath, loud enough for her, and a few in the crowd, to hear. Alicia's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. She didn't yell, she didn't cower. She simply stood there, unshaken. And that infuriated him even more. The crowd had begun to notice. A few people slowed their steps, sensing the tension. Some recognized Simmons instantly, this was just like him. They knew where this was heading, but nobody dared intervene. Not yet. Simmons puffed out his chest. "Last chance. Show me your ID, or you're going to regret it." Alicia crossed her arms. "I know my rights, officer." And that was it. His pride snapped like a brittle branch. The moment she refused to bow to his authority, he saw red. In one swift motion, his boot shot out, striking her in the side. She fell hard, the air knocked out of her lungs, her phone clattering across the pavement. The sound of her body hitting the ground echoed through the street, shocking everyone who witnessed it. For Simmons, it was just another day. Another show of dominance. Another moment to remind the world that he was in charge. His smirk widened, pleased with himself. He looked around at the stunned faces of the crowd, daring them to say something. "Learn to respect authority," he barked, as though his cruelty had been a lesson worth teaching. But this time was different. He didn't know it yet, but he had crossed a line he couldn't step back from. Because Alicia Grant wasn't just any woman. And standing in that crowd was someone who was about to make Simmons realize that his so-called untouchable power was nothing compared to real influence. As Alicia lay on the cold pavement, struggling to steady her breathing, the crowd around her began to stir. Murmurs rippled through the bystanders, shock written across their faces. Some had finally pulled out their phones, recording the scene, knowing it was too outrageous to go undocumented. But amid the whispers and tension, one man moved with a calm, deliberate presence. He pushed his way through the growing circle of onlookers, his tall figure impossible to ignore. His stride was steady, his tailored navy blue suit immaculate, his polished shoes gleaming under the afternoon sun. Every step he took seemed to carry weight. People in the crowd began to recognize him, their hushed voices rising with disbelief. "Wait, isn't that Marcus Reed?" one man whispered, nudging his friend. "Yeah, that's him. The billionaire investor." "What's he doing here?" another replied, eyes wide. Marcus Reed wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. A self-made billionaire with investments in tech, banking, and real estate, his face had been on the cover of Forbes more times than most could count. He was the type of man politicians called for donations, the type of man news anchors quoted, the type of man whose name carried influence everywhere he went. But Marcus was also known for something else. He despised injustice. And now, he had seen enough. He stepped into the circle, his voice booming with authority. "Officer!" The single word echoed down the street. Simmons turned, his smirk fading as he registered who had spoken. His arrogant posture faltered. The badge on his chest didn't feel so heavy anymore. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus demanded, his eyes narrowing at Simmons. The officer stiffened, trying to keep control of the situation. This woman was resisting. "I had to." "Resisting?" Marcus cut him off, his voice dripping with disbelief. He pointed at Alicia, still on the ground, her blouse dirt-stained, her breathing uneven. "That woman wasn't resisting. That woman is Alicia Grant. Do you have any idea who you just assaulted?" The crowd erupted in gasps. The whispers grew into shouts. Alicia Grant? People knew the name instantly. She wasn't just rich, she was iconic, a role model, a woman who had built an empire from the ground up. To see her lying on the pavement, treated like nothing, was beyond shocking. Phones zoomed in closer. The story was writing itself on camera. Simmons's face drained of color. His arrogance cracked, replaced by unease. He had thought she was just another easy target, someone who would stay quiet and powerless. Instead, he had kicked a billionaire, in broad daylight, with half the street watching and recording. Marcus didn't back down. He took a step closer, his voice thundering. "You think your badge gives you the right to abuse people? You think no one is watching? Well, guess what? The whole world is about to see exactly what you just did." Simmons stammered, his words tripping over themselves. I didn't know." "That's the problem." Marcus roared. "It shouldn't matter who she is. Billionaire or not, you don't get to assault people because of your prejudice." Alicia, with Marcus's help, slowly rose to her feet. Her body ached, but her dignity remained unbroken. She brushed the dirt from her blouse, her eyes burning with fire. The crowd erupted into cheers and shouts of encouragement. For the first time in his career, Simmons wasn't in control. The eyes of the people, the lens of dozens of cameras, and the presence of two billionaires had turned the tables completely. And though Simmons didn't know it yet, his downfall had just begun. Marcus bent down, his arms steady as he helped Alicia rise to her feet. She leaned on him slightly, wincing but refusing to show weakness. The crowd had grown larger now, people standing shoulder to shoulder, phones raised high like torches of justice. Every second was being recorded, live-streamed, and shared across social media. Simmons, still rattled, tried to cling to his authority. Everyone stepped back. "This is official police business," he shouted, his voice cracking. But the crowd didn't move. They weren't afraid anymore. They had just witnessed him assault a woman unprovoked, and the presence of Marcus Reed gave them courage. Marcus turned to him, his tone like steel. "No, officer. This isn't police business. This is abuse of power. And it ends right here." Simmons swallowed hard. His arrogance was slipping, replaced by desperation. She was refusing to cooperate, he insisted. She was suspicious. Suspicious? Marcus cut in, his voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. He pointed directly at Alicia. This woman is a respected business leader. She's done more for this city than you ever will. And even if she weren't, what gives you the right to kick anyone lying on the ground like that? The crowd erupted with agreement. Yeah, someone shouted. We saw everything, another voice added. The chants started small, justice. Justice. But quickly grew louder, echoing down the street. Alicia straightened, finding her voice. Her tone was calm but carried the weight of authority. You abused your badge. You thought you could humiliate me because of my skin color. But what you didn't realize is that people like you are the reason change must happen. And it will. Her words rippled through the crowd like electricity. People cheered, their phones zooming in closer. Simmons, red-faced, glanced nervously at the cameras. His entire career was flashing before his eyes, complaints ignored, misconduct overlooked, all of it now teetering on the edge of exposure. He tried one last desperate defense. You don't understand, No, Marcus cut him off firmly. It's you who doesn't understand. Your days of hiding behind that badge are over. The world just saw who you really are. Then, in a move that silenced even Simmons, Alicia pulled out her phone. With deliberate calm, she dialed her lawyer's number on speaker. The crowd hushed, straining to hear every word. Yes, I'd like to file charges against Officer Brad Simmons for assault and misconduct, she said clearly, her eyes locked on the trembling officer. Gasps, cheers, and applause erupted. The officer's face went pale. He looked around wildly, but there was no escape. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on Alicia's shoulder. You're not alone. Not anymore. The tables had turned completely. Simmons, once feared, now stood powerless in front of the very people he had always intimidated. The badge on his chest no longer symbolized authority, it symbolized disgrace. And as the crowd's chants grew louder, Simmons realized the truth, his downfall had already begun. By nightfall, the story had spread like wildfire. Clips of Officer Brad Simmons kicking Alicia Grant had flooded every social media platform. Hashtags demanding justice trended worldwide. News outlets ran breaking reports with headlines like, Billionaire businesswoman assaulted by cop in broad daylight and officer exposed after racist attack caught on camera. The police department scrambled to contain the fallout. Within hours, Simmons was placed on immediate suspension without pay, pending an investigation. But the truth was already clear, his career was crumbling before his eyes. Internal Affairs opened his file, and suddenly, dozens of old complaints that had been buried for years, resurfaced. Other victims began speaking out, sharing their own experiences of his bullying and misconduct. The department could no longer protect him. Meanwhile, Alicia wasn't silent. The very next morning, she stood on the steps of City Hall, dressed in a sharp navy suit, Marcus Reed at her side. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. And Alicia, standing tall and dignified despite her bruises, delivered a message that would echo far beyond that city. This is not just about me, she began, her voice steady but powerful. What happened yesterday happens every day to people who don't have cameras watching, to people who don't have a platform, to people who can't fight back. I was assaulted not because of what I did, but because of who I am, a black woman. And enough is enough. Her words cut through the noise like lightning. The crowd outside City Hall erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled frantically, their microphones thrust forward. Marcus stepped up next to her. Let me be clear, he said firmly, his deep voice commanding the attention of every lens. No one is above the law. Not billionaires, not politicians, and certainly not police officers who abuse their power. What we saw yesterday was unacceptable. And we're going to make sure there are consequences. Together, they announced the launch of a new initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and racial injustice. Alicia pledged millions from her fortune to fund legal aid, awareness campaigns, and community programs to hold abusive officers accountable. The crowd roared with approval. For the first time, many felt hope that real change might actually be possible. As for Simmons, his world unraveled quickly. Within a week, he was fired from the force. Within a month, he faced criminal charges for assault and misconduct. His face, once that of a smug enforcer, was now plastered across the news as a disgraced officer, a cautionary tale of arrogance and unchecked power. But the true victory wasn't just his downfall, it was the rise of something greater. Alicia's courage, Marcus's support, and the unity of the community turned one act of cruelty into a movement. Standing before the cheering crowd, Alicia ended her speech with words that sent chills down spines. "You thought you could silence me with violence. But what you didn't know is that you gave me a louder voice. And now the whole world is listening." The applause thundered like never before. And Officer Simmons? He had finally learned the lesson he thought he was teaching: respect. And that's how one officer's arrogance turned into his downfall, while one woman's courage sparked a movement. Alicia Grant proved that even in moments of humiliation, strength and justice can rise above hate. What do you think? Did he deserve everything that happened next? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and ring the bell so you never miss the next one.